Les presento en estos momentos a la señora Bárbara Yngvesson. Ella es antropóloga y profesora universitaria estadounidense en el Hampshire College de Massachusetts, y su investigación en la década de los años 90 se dedicó a temas relacionados con la adopción abierta. Durante los últimos 10 años, ella ha estudiado la adopción transnacional, concretamente el flujo de niños y niñas de Asia y América Latina hacia Suecia y Estados Unidos. Su investigación más reciente analiza la experiencia de personas adultas adoptadas en el tema de la identidad y pertenencia en el contexto de adopciones transraciales y transnacionales. Es madre biológica y adoptiva de una adopción abierta en Estados Unidos hace más de 30 años. Su último libro se titula Belonging in an Adopted World, Race, Identity and Transnational Adoption. Pertenencia a un mundo adoptado, raza, identidad y la adopción transnacional.
I want to thank Diana Marr and the organizers of this conference for inviting me. I think it's a wonderful arrangement of speakers, and the topics that we're discussing are very exciting. My interest in research on adoption began with my own involvement in an open domestic adoption in the United States in 1981, when my husband and I adopted our son, Finn, who is now 30. Although my initial contact with Finn's birth parents was an informal one, my brother...
Les presento en estos momentos a la señora Bárbara Yngvesson. Ella es antropóloga y profesora universitaria estadounidense en el Hampshire College de Massachusetts, y su investigación en la década de los años 90 se dedicó a temas relacionados con la adopción abierta. Durante los últimos 10 años, ella ha estudiado la adopción transnacional, concretamente el flujo de niños y niñas de Asia y América Latina hacia Suecia y Estados Unidos. Su investigación más reciente analiza la experiencia de personas adultas adoptadas en el tema de la identidad y pertenencia en el contexto de adopciones transraciales y transnacionales. Es madre biológica y adoptiva de una adopción abierta en Estados Unidos hace más de 30 años. Su último libro se titula Belonging in an Adopted World, Race, Identity and Transnational Adoption. Pertenencia a un mundo adoptado, raza, identidad y la adopción transnacional.
I want to thank Diana Marr and the organizers of this conference for inviting me. I think it's a wonderful arrangement of speakers, and the topics that we're discussing are very exciting. My interest in research on adoption began with my own involvement in an open domestic adoption in the United States in 1981, when my husband and I adopted our son, Finn, who is now 30. Although my initial contact with Finn's birth parents was an informal one, my brother was acquainted with them and knew they were looking for adoptive parents. My assumptions were conventional. Once the adoption was completed, we would have no further contact with his birth family. For various reasons, things did not work out that way. I heard through my brother, who knew Finn's birth mother, that she was depressed after giving her child to us, and so I sent a letter to her. We adopted Finn at the end of October. I sent this letter in December. When we adopted Finn, he was 4 months old, and when I sent this letter, he was 6 months old. So I sent a letter to her through the lawyer, because I was supposed to have no direct contact, through the lawyer who made the legal arrangements, telling her how Finn was doing, how happy we were to have him, and sending her a small gift made from the wood of a cedar tree growing in the woods in the forest behind our house. When we adopted Finn, she had brought me a gift, and I didn't have any gift for her. So this was my return gift. She, in turn, wrote back, thanking me and saying that any time we would like to let her know how Finn was doing, she would be happy to hear about it. So, as I'm going to be talking about today, one of the anxieties of adoptive parents in open relationships is that somehow the birth mother will get too intrusive. She will be too involved. And then you won't be able to raise the child the way you want to. When she wrote this letter to me, I felt relieved. I thought this is going to be okay. And then when Finn's adoption was finalized 6 months later, his birth mother, Diana, wrote a letter to all of us, to my husband, to me, to my biological son, Doug, and to Finn, saying congratulations. So I felt that this was okay. The brief exchange, the initial exchange through lawyers, began what was to be a regular conversation by mail and eventually expanded into visits. There have been gaps, sort of spaces, in our communication at times, but on the whole, we have kept in touch. My husband and our 2 sons, Doug and Finn, traveled to California every 2 to 3 years until Finn was in his mid-teens. His mother, Diana, and I still write to each other regularly at Christmas, sometimes. When my book was published, I sent her a copy of it. She wrote to me saying how excited she was to see that I'd written this book. On the other hand, Finn's relationship with his birth family has changed over the years, with the period of greatest connection between the time he was 5 years old to the time he was 15 years old. And so this is a picture of the time when Finn was probably 14, one of the last visits we made to Bolinas in California. His birth mother is here. This is me a few years ago. This is Finn. And this is his birth sister, Breth, his birth father's daughter. So it's quite a big family. And this is a picture. Again, this is me. This is his birth father, Shao. This is his birth mother's daughter, Didi. His birth mother was originally married to an African-American sculptor. She was divorced, so 3 of his birth siblings are biracial. Whoops. This is Breth, again, the daughter of his birth father, and this is Finn. After Finn was 15, he decided he did not want to continue the relationship with his birth parents in the way that he had. The last visit that we had, this visit, was extremely difficult for him. He said to me, I was quite upset because I've been working on this relationship for a long time. He told me it was quite confusing for him to be traveling back and forth. He could stay in one place or the other, but he didn't want to be in both. And then that has changed, so that he has had at various times relationships with his birth siblings. I think he finds his relationship with his birth father much easier, although he hasn't spoken to him for a long time. His birth father is very relaxed about the whole thing, and I think that made a big difference. His birth mother, by contrast, increasingly wanted to have more contact with him, and he found this difficult. When he was 21, I went out to dinner with him. We celebrated his 21st birthday. We went to a movie called Casa de los Babies, which is about transnational adoption. And after a couple of glasses of wine, I got my courage up and I said to him, because I didn't really want to touch on these very difficult topics, why is it that you seem to be upset with your birth mother? Because she kept asking me why he didn't answer her letters. She had called him on his birthday when he was 21 and he didn't want to talk with her. And he said to me, I think the problem is that she thinks she's my mother. So My big effort was to establish a more inclusive form of parenting in which we were both mothers in some way. And I think that's the problem that I want to put forth to you about open adoption. That on the one hand, open adoption aspired to include the birth mother in the adoptive family in a situation in which the legal laws of adoption allow only one family, the legal family. And in the United States, I'm not sure about in Spain, I think in Spain, but in most Western European countries, adoptions are plenary. The relationship with the birth family is terminated, so legally there is only one real family. With open adoptions in the United States, and certainly in the case of mine, the effort was made by a number of people to try to include the birth mother more. In the research that I was doing in the early 90s on open adoption, where I interviewed birth and adoptive parents, who were mothers really, who were trying to keep in contact, what was clear was that this is an extremely complicated relationship. One social worker at one point said to me that the birth mother is just like an aunt, like, a sister. But really, she's nothing like an aunt, I would say. Because the thing that is different about the birth mother in open adoptions is that the adoptive mother is supposed to become so this is, the adoptive mother becomes the only legal mother, and the birth mother is basically erased from the record. And I think in efforts to create an open adoptive relationship, it's hard to get away from the fact that the adoptive family becomes, and I'm just going to skip ahead because I'm going to go back to these records, but the adoptive family becomes what Judith Modell in her book in 1994 calls an as-if genealogical family. In other words, it's supposed to become almost identical to the genealogical family. And what that means is that, at least in the United States, at the period when before adoptions were open, an effort was made by social workers to match the adoptive and the birth family as much as possible, so they looked identical to one another. So the adoptive family and the birth family were supposed to be from the same religion. They were supposed to be racially identical. And they were supposed to, in some open adoptions with agencies that were managing open adoptions, the effort was to make the birth and the adoptive mother as close to one another in all kinds of habits and, sort of their everyday experiences. So the idea was that there should be no difference. You really had the same family because it was as if it was born to you. So I think that notion of an as-if genealogical family complicates the effort to actually introduce a different mother who's not part of your family, who has completely different ideas about raising a child into the adoptive family. So I want to go back. At the time that we adopted Finn, his birth parents brought us the original record of his birth. And this is really what a closed adoption and what a sealed record, which accompanies almost all adoptions in the United States today, involves. This explains that his mother, Diana McQuaid, was the mother of Finn Yngvesson. They named him Finn, and we kept that name. And that he was born in the Marin County General Hospital in Santa Rosa, California. This is the legal document we received 6 months later after the adoption, which says that I, Barbara Yngvesson, delivered this child in the Marin County Hospital in Santa Rosa. So the birth mother completely disappears from that record. She no longer exists. And I think that receiving this record in the mail was a complete shock to me. I couldn't understand how they could say that I had been somewhere I'd never been and delivered a child. And I think that was the reason that I decided to pursue this work on open adoption initially, and then eventually research on transnational adoption, My question was, why is it so important to get rid of the birth mother? What is it? Why does she seem